This is Pokemon Yellow, and it's going to be the next ROM hack we release in the Pokemon Legacy trio. Now, compared to other generational upgrade titles like Crystal or Emerald, Yellow is really weird. And so today we're going to specifically look at the 9 ways in which we're going to fix it. We'll then finish with a quick discussion on Pokemon Emerald Legacy and also cover how to enter the giveaway for a hard copy of Pokemon Crystal Legacy. The first thing we're going to talk about today is what we're even aiming to do. And that's because when I first announced Pokemon Crystal Legacy, I didn't do a very good job of explaining exactly what we were trying to do. In a nutshell, the Legacy series aims to make old Pokemon games better while preserving what made them special in the first place. Basically what this means is it's a huge balancing act. To make the game better, you're doing everything you can to improve Pokemon, trainers, and other features. But this is coupled with the fact that every single change you make strays further from the original game. So basically every change is being weighed on the seesaw of how much does this make the game more fun versus how much does this divert from the original concept. Something like adding running shoes is pure quality of life, so it's nearly entirely upside. Taking a really forgettable gym leader fight and making it challenging adds a lot of upside with minimal downside, but something like changing a really iconic ace like Whitney's Miltank is going to have not that much upside with a lot of change in feel. Now, as for what we're trying to do, there's also some requests we get that have no upside and a lot of change in feel. And the biggest example of this is people asking for a physical special split, or in the case of Gen 1, just making there be 2 special stats at all. See, we don't like this because it would mean a massive overhaul and shift in terms of the way the game is played. So it's really diverting away from the core game. And if you're a Gen 1 fan who knows Gen 1 for having that unique quirk, it doesn't actually really add anything for you. So that's a look at the Legacy philosophy. But Yellow is very different from any other game in the franchise, and we're now going to look at its design philosophy to see how Legacy will have to adapt to fit its design. Yellow is unique because unlike Crystal or Emerald, it's not actually the third title of Gen 1. See, the red and blue that you and I know, that released simply as Pokemon Blue in Japan. So Japan's blue is the exact same thing as our red and blue, and that is actually the crystal, the emeralds, the platinum of Gen 1. And so yellow is then not the third title, but the 4th title of the generation. And yellow ends up being a very different concept from something like Crystal or Emerald in that it just has a completely different storyline. I mean, to begin, it's one of the only games where you don't have a starter selection and are just given Pikachu. But it's weird too because it gifts you all 3 of those starter Pokemon before the 3rd gym. The gyms are modified and in some case follows the anime. Your rival's got a different team. Jesse and James show up. Despite the fact that Emerald and Crystal do change their storylines, there's something about Yellow that just feels conceptually different. Crystal and Emerald feel purely additive, and Yellow does have purely additive improvements like better sprites. Charizard can learn Fly. It also removes unique encounters, places some much further into the game. When you also factor in the addition of Pikachu, Yellow starts to feel a whole lot different from Red and Blue. And it does this to the point where Yellow is just not the definitive title of Gen 1 in the same way that Crystal and Emerald are. So with all that in mind, the way we're fitting the philosophy into Yellow ends up being a little different. We're gonna bring in the classic improvements you're expecting. We're going to keep Yellow feeling like Yellow, but we're also going to try to bring back some of that Red and Blue feel. Ultimately, the balancing act of Yellow Legacy will be to preserve what makes this game unique while attempting to make it more complete and feel like the definitive Gen 1 title. Now from here, let's actually dive into what that's going to look like. Wild encounters are one of Pokemon Yellow's weakest area. Outside of the flavored Pikachu starter, most people opt to play Red and Blue because the encounters of Yellow are kind of sad. Now on top of the usual suspects like Nidoran, Sparrow, Rattata, and Pidgey, things do start pretty good with the added Mankey on Route 22. You've also got Mount Moon adding Geodude, Sandshrew, Clefairy, and Zubat. Now the route above Misty's gym adds Abra, Venonat, Oddish, and Bellsprout, but then a very weird thing happens. Route 4, just before Cerulean City, adds no new encounters. The only new Pokemon on Route 5 is Jigglypuff. Route 6 adds nothing. Route 11 only adds Drowsy. 9 has nothing. Rock Tunnel adds Machop and Onix. 8 adds nothing. 7 adds nothing. 13 sees Farfetch'd, and 14 sees nothing new. Now, in some cases, interesting red and blue encounters like Growlithe were pushed all the way back to the mansion in Cinnabar, but then you've got Pokemon like Electabuzz, Jinx, Magmar, and Weezing that just aren't obtainable in the game at all. And then, of course, just like in red and blue, you've got some really interesting heavy hitters that aren't available until the Safari Zone. Tauros, Scyther, Rhyhorn, Dratini, Execute, Pinsir are all locked away in the Safari Zone that is so late into the game, it almost feels not worth it to pick these late encounters up. And so after that initial early game wave of arguably mediocre Pokemon, the encounters just sort of dry up in the section that you want to be finding new encounters. And this leads to one of the game's biggest problems, in that almost every single playthrough is going to have 4 of the exact same Pokemon. You're gonna run Pikachu since it's your starter, and then you're gonna find nothing all that interesting and end up running all 3 of the starters. This then leaves the option for only 2 unique team members, and yellow playthroughs end up feeling all very uniform. So I think a really great place to start with fixing yellow would be to give players the option to use other Pokemon. Now, of course, nothing is set in stone at this point, but I just want to give some examples of some ideas I would like to try. The first thing is to address the heavy use and almost near dependence on yellow gift starters. I want to leave this feature completely as is to give the player the freedom to make this choice. I just want to give players other options. Something I think would be really interesting is if we added Poliwag to Route 2, Bellsprout to Viridian Forest, and Vulpix to Route 3. The thought process is that this would add all 3 of the elemental starter types to very early spots in the game. Bellsprout and Poliwag will also help you face a buffed Brock. I'd also like to bring some of the lesser used Gen 1 Pokemon to the forefront. Now, in Gen 1 exclusively, Tauros is a really interesting Pokemon. I'd like to give it a bigger spotlight, but I'm also aware that it might be too overpowered if given any earlier than the Safari Zone. Scyther, on the other hand, is something that I think you could easily add earlier and it wouldn't be too overpowered. Now, we're obviously in the very early steps of this, so nothing is set in stone, and we're very open to your suggestions at this point. But another big problem area of Gen 1 is very much part and parcel of the encounter issue. The 3 starters are used so prevalently because there's just nothing else that's really that good. Now, what's interesting about this is it's a much different problem from that of Pokemon Crystal. Game Freak actually went really hard in building Kanto Pokemon stats, so we haven't seen many major issues in terms of Pokemon needing stat buffs. Outside of Onix, there's only a few Pokemon I can think that really are in need of some buffs. The more obvious and widespread issue with Gen 1 is just learn sets. Like, if you thought Crystal was bare, Gen 1 is a fucking wasteland. For example, Rhydon gets no rock or ground moves, Electrode gets no electric moves, and while Sandslash does fortunately learn Slash, it does not learn any ground moves either. Outside of the starters, this is basically every single Pokemon in the game. Now, Gen 1 does salvage this problem by having a really good lineup of TMs, but I don't think this is enough to solve the problem. I just think that Pokemon should at the very least get a decently powered, if not strong, final move in their respective typing. And while this will be the changes we'll make to Yellow, it's not quite as simple as that. And that's because Gen 1 moves are in need of a serious rework. So to give you an example of just how limited moves are in Gen 1, let's take a look at the Fire type. In this game, the only early damaging fire move is Ember. There's also no middle ground move like Flame Wheel that you saw in the next generation. So outside of the trapping move Fire Spin, which is its own thing, the second highest damaging move is Fire Punch at 75 base power. But Fire Punch basically doesn't exist in the game because the only 2 Pokemon that learn it are Hitmonchan and Magmar. And so outside of that, you're left with Flamethrower and Fire Blast. Now, compared to future generations, you would be right to say that that sounds super bare. But compared to the likes of Bug, Ghost, and Dragon, Fire is actually in a pretty good place in Gen 1. The only damaging Bug moves are Leech Life, Twin Needle, and Pin Missile. Outside of Nightshade, the only damaging Ghost move is Lick. And the only Dragon move in the game is Dragon Rage. Gen 1 is just so crazy, but I actually find this really exciting because I think this insanely limited number of options is going to allow for us to create a very tight and well-balanced game. And I also don't think this will be as challenging as one might expect. Dragon doesn't actually need that much work since there's only one Dragon line appearing in a single fight, so it probably just needs a single move. As for 3 Bug moves, that's enough. We just need to make them stronger and give them to the Bug Pokemon. I think of the big three offenders, Ghost is probably the one that's going to take the most amount of work. Now, we're still working on ideas here, but what I've been considering is taking Lick from 20 to 40 base power, then making Dream Eater Ghost, and possibly reducing its base power from 100 down to 80. Actually, I should also probably mention, Ghost type does not hit Psychics, and this is actually a glitch, not intended, but we probably would fix that. We'd also probably make Ghost special again, maybe even make Dragon physical. Now, outside of these sort of specific things, we'd mostly just be porting back the changes we made in Crystal Legacy. So that's a look at moves. Now, outside of Pokemon changes, the other major set of changes we would obviously see are to the trainers. The gym leaders are pretty much all over the place in this game, and we would just be giving them a similar feeling makeover as to what we did for Johto in Crystal Legacy. But one thing I would like to do is actually have consistency through the Legacy series. This would mean making trainers like Blue, Koga, Bruno, and Lance have similar looking teams, yet simplified to match their positions in Gen 1. I also think that the rival Blue is a little bit underwhelming in Yellow. Outside of the Eevee starter and Alakazam, he's got Sandslash, Magnemite, Ninetales, Cloyster. It just feels not on brand. So I'm probably leaning towards bringing back the likes of Arcanine, Gyarados, Exeggutor, and Rhydon. Now, as for quality of life changes, I need to be very clear that Yellow is going to be much more simple than Crystal. The code for Yellow is an absolute mess, and there's just only so much you can do with it. Now, there are quality of life things that we absolutely want to add. We would add running shoes, an added EXP bar. You can fix field moves, make it so you can catch all 151 Pokemon, buyable TMs the same way we did in Crystal Legacy. HMs can be deleted. There's also one weird bug where, for example, if you hit a Pidgey that's flying normal with a fighting move, it will say it's not very effective because it's only reading the first type. We want to fix small things like that, but just keep in mind it's going to be simple things because we're limited by the actual game itself. Now, as for the odd quirks and gameplay glitches of Gen 1, if you've been paying attention, you may already know what we're going to do with that. There are some interactions in the Gen 1 code that are so integral to the experience of this game that removing them would completely destroy what makes Gen 1 special. I'm talking things like the way critical hits are based off of speed, all moves having a 1 in 256 chance to miss, the way Toxic and Leech Seed interact. This is the type of stuff we want to preserve because this is what makes this game so special. I will also say, if you're looking for something that addresses it, there's a great ROM hack called Red++. It does all this kind of stuff. Now, Yellow Legacy is going to keep the weird oddities of Gen 1, but it's going to build on it. An example I'll give you are the trapping moves. When Wrap is active, the opposing player cannot attack, and if you're faster than the other Pokemon, you just kind of can kill Pokemon for free. It is a really strong move, but it's part of Gen 1. And so what we thought is rather than like just nerf it or remove it, just treat it like a really strong move. Like let Pokemon that are kind of bad have it, make it a super late game move, but leave it in, right? You wouldn't give a level 1 Pokemon Hyper Beam because it's really strong, and that's how we're gonna treat Wrap. On that note, Gen 1 Hyper Beam is sick. Gonna leave it like it is. Anyway, this has been a bit more of a loose video, but Pikachu is another thing we need to talk about. As the starter of this game, it's quite frustrating that it's so bad. Our goal with this ROM hack is to fix Pikachu so that players can use it through the whole run if they want to. One way we're thinking of doing this is making it so that the badge boost increases your Pikachu stats by 25% rather than the standard 12.5. We're also thinking of allowing Pikachu to be given every HM. Pikachu is shown flying and surfing in the intro, so it only makes sense to give him that. Pikachu later gets strength and cut anyway, so it kind of makes sense. And also, Pikachu with Surf would actually just do damage. Now, Pikachu will still not be allowed to evolve in the game, but we will find a way for the player to get Raichu just to complete the Pokedex. And ultimately, we're just going to try to find a way to make Pikachu work in Pikachu's game. Now, a lot of you have been patiently waiting for me to cover Pokemon Emerald Legacy. Pokemon Emerald Legacy is going to be the third and final release in the Legacy trio. I understand a lot of you are very excited for this release, as I just know how popular Emerald is, but there's some really important reasons that I've decided to do Yellow first and hold off for the end for Emerald. The first is simply from just a climactic element. I just think it makes the most sense to finish the trio with the most popular game. It also just makes more sense to do it from an order perspective. There's actually a bigger reason than that though. Now from the outside, it might look like Emerald is a pretty easy easy fix because, oh, it's already a pretty polished game. It's not too bad. In reality, Emerald is going to take a very long time simply because there is just so much to consider. Sure, Emerald is not as broken as the first two games, but in being so broken and having so few features, the first two generations are a lot easier to fix. Emerald is already really good, and so it's going to take a lot more time to make it that much better. But you've also just got so much more stuff. You've got 386 Pokemon with like 200 more moves, and they all have abilities. You go from Gen 1 and 2, which each Pokemon has like 10 options for moves and maybe like slight stat changes. Then you go to Emerald, and there's all these more moves, and there's all these abilities, and that makes the options like 30. And so then, not only are there more Pokemon, but each Pokemon with all these other different options now have interactions with every other one. And all those Pokemon have like 30 options. And all of a sudden, it just becomes exponentially more complicated. And so the work has already been started on Emerald Legacy as well. But I'd rather just get Yellow out first to you because it's not going to take near as much work. And as Emerald is being cooked up, we're also going to cook Yellow, and it'll just get to you sooner. Now, I'm going to drop some dates for releases, but please, big grain of salt. Don't go saying SmithPlays Pokemon said this and it's that. I'm gonna give you dates, and the games are gonna not come out on the dates that I promised, and you're gonna be okay with that because you understand that I never promised anything, okay? In a perfect world, I would love Yellow Legacy to drop in like end of March, April. I don't know if that's gonna happen. I have no idea. This stuff always takes longer than expected. In a perfect world, you're playing Emerald Legacy in a year from now, end of 2024. I don't know if that's gonna happen. If it doesn't happen, it just took more time than expected, and it's probably going to. Anyway, this is our last produced video for 2023. I'm very excited for what the next year has in store. Lastly, if you want to enter to win a hard copy cartridge version of Pokemon Crystal Legacy, just be a subscriber and comment down below some stuff you'd like to see in Yellow Legacy. 2023 has been a really fun year for this channel, so I just want to thank you, and hopefully 2024 can be even better. I'll see you soon.